Hey guys, it's Daniel with the Williston Church of Christ. Just wanted to welcome you to this week's lesson. Hope that you're getting a lot out of them. Before this week's lesson begins, though, take just a moment, look down there below, click that subscribe button, ring that little bell. That way you'll get notifications of upcoming videos. Hoping to have a lot more content starting to come out, maybe some midweek stuff. It's in the planning. Not sure exactly when it's going to start, but it will be starting soon. So tune back and hope to see you soon. We're closing out our series this morning on 1 Peter, looking specifically at the struggles and the problems that they were facing with persecution and just the struggles of becoming Christians, and Peter writing to them about dealing with that. And we're going to skip over a few verses because there are a repeat of things that we've already talked about, and I didn't intend this lesson to be a verse-by-verse intensive study of 1 Peter, though it's almost turned into that, but rather for it to again, just to be that kind of guide, how to deal with struggles, how to deal with just the social issues of life that weigh us down. We're also going to skip past the first part of chapter 5, first 5 verses that deal with elders and their role, how they are to lead over the flock, and how the flock is in turn supposed to respond to elders. And so we'll save that, we'll come back to it, we'll visit it in another study. But for now, we're going to move on past that and come to what Peter uses to kind of conclude the whole matter and to tie it all down to its final analysis. And so we look this morning at 1 Peter chapter 5, and beginning with verse 6, as we read together there, again, 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxieties on him, because he cares for you. Be alert, sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kinds of sufferings. And the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered a little while, will himself restore you and make you strong and firm and steadfast." What a closing. What a passage as Peter encourages them to humble themselves under God's mighty hand. Peter is talking about a complete and total submission to God and his plans. He's talked to us about submitting to one another. He's talked to us about submitting to elders. He's talked to us about spouses and how they should love one another and submit to one another and work on that relationship together. But all of that is a small part of submitting and humbling ourselves before God. Peter writes to a group of people that are struggling with persecution, with false teachers preying upon their struggles, that are reaching in and taking their fears and just making those worse and using those to tear them down and to tear apart their faith. The same thing happens to us still today. Peter's direction for them still remains the key for us today. So let's look at that a little more closely. And it begins with the realization that being humbled is not a momentary thing. Sometimes I'm afraid that we fall into the trap of thinking of that humbling ourselves is what we do at a time of worship. We gather and we humble ourselves before God and we sit here in awe of who He is and sing His praises and we have this humbling moment. Or perhaps our humble moment is a time of trouble. When something has knocked us to our knees and we realize in that moment how far we've fallen and that I need to get back before God. Or maybe it's that moment of sin. When I have that sudden realization and all I can do is just hang my head and hold my head and think, my God, what did I do before you? How could I have done that? And we have in those moments this humbleness that we find, and we should. But humility is not just in the moments. It is a complete submission of my life to God. It is a lifestyle that recognizes you're God and I'm not. When I wake up tomorrow, He'll still be God and I still won't be. He's perfect. I'm not. His wisdom is never wrong. Mine fails all the time. And I have to recognize those things. It's what Jesus was talking about in the Sermon on the Mount when He talked about being poor in spirit. Peter says, well, it's time to humble ourselves underneath God's mighty hand, under His plans, under His will, under whatever He subjects our lives to. So that in its proper time, in due time, God can lift you up out of that. We're going to talk more about that due time in a moment, but I've got to be willing to put myself in His hands. And in doing so, Peter says, well, while you're there, while you're humbling yourself before God, part of that humbling is giving things over to Him. The recognition that, God, I can't handle this on my own. I need you. Peter says, cast your anxieties on Him because He cares for you. Because He cares for you, He'll do something about them. There's going to be times where God will lift us up immediately. And there's also going to be times where our humility will be tested, where our submission will be tested because we have to wait on Him. That's not the way we like to have it happen. We like to have it happen now. We like to have these moments where we bring something to God, we cast that anxiety on Him, but then we look and say, God, there's the problem. Now deal with it. Now. That's not humility. That's a role reversal. That's me trying to be the boss of God, rather than being God, being the one who dictates the extremes and the paths of my life. I've got to learn to be humble in every situation. Peter says, be alert because of that. Be sober-minded. We've talked about that a couple of times, of being aware of the choices before us, of keeping our thinking clear so that we're able to make the right choices in those moments. And then he says, be resistant. Now, too many times we're resistant, all right, but we're resistant of God. Peter says, be resistant of Satan. Know that we're all going through the same things, the same types of problems. Christians around the world have money problems. Christians around the world have relationship problems. Christians around the world have spiritual problems. Christians around the world have problems. We're not alone. But Satan and his allies are always there. They're always whispering to us. They're always trying to attack us, to single us out, to separate us from the herd, so to speak, like that roaring lion, so that we can be the one that he devours. And he does that with statements like, where is God? In a world where there's so much suffering, where is this powerful God that you speak of, that you say you believe in? How can he let so much bad stuff happen? How can he let the little children have this happen to them? How can he let so many people suffer in this area? How can he let that go on over here? How can this storm hit? How can this pandemic hit? Why doesn't your God do something about it? The answer is, my God is doing something about it. He's working every day, but he's working in his time. He's working in his way, in his wisdom, accomplishing what he has laid out for his creation. Satan, you can't tell me otherwise. God must not love you. Look at the mess your life is in. God says, I loved you enough to send Jesus. I loved you enough for my own son to die on a cross so that you could be saved from your sins, from what you were incapable of saving yourself from. I love you that much. Satan, get out of the picture. You're just lying. Trying to attack our faith, trying to make it waver, trying to drive a wedge between us and God. Peter says, be alert for it. Watch out. Know what Satan's up to, but also know what God is doing. Spend time talking to him. Spend time studying about him. Spend time getting to know what God is trying to do in your life. Because in due time, God will restore you. Humility and submission to God means allowing things to work out on his timeline. Due time is a relative term. It's one that causes us a lot of issues because, as I said earlier, we want it now, God. We look at things from this perspective of a lifespan of 60 to 80 years, give or take. And really, we don't even look at it from that perspective. We look at it in hours and days and weeks, months at the most. And we want due time to be the shortest amount of that possible. God's looking at it from eternity. And so due time might be years, might be a lifetime. There may be these moments where we have to suffer for a little while compared to the grand scheme of things. Maybe even to the point of death, as many of the Christians Peter was writing to faced, had happened to them. But we serve the God who has a plan. We serve the God who ultimately, if you humbly submit yourself to Him, live as He's called you to live, is going to lift you up and restore you eternally if He doesn't do it sooner. See, the problem is we don't know the plans that God has for our suffering. We don't know the plans that God has in totality for our lives, except that it's supposed to end with us in heaven. What is He trying to do? Is He trying to test my patience? Is He trying to test my resolve? Is He trying to test my humility by seeing if I will stay submitting even through the struggles? Is He trying to reach somebody else by them seeing how, as a Christian, I hold up under those struggles with the help of God? Or is He training me to go out and take that struggle that I've been through, that I've overcome through Him, and begin to help somebody else with that same struggle? See, God has a plan, and He will lift you up. And so as we wrap up this lesson, as we wrap up this series, submit yourselves to God. There's no other way for it to be successful. Humble yourselves. Look for Him to fulfill His plans in your life. Watch out for Satan. And resist him with everything that is you, and give the rest of it to God. And allow God to work in due time to restore you. The lesson's yours. The series is yours.